All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. This is a presentation that's kind of near and dear to my heart. It is about changing how to deal with deadlines because, I've always had a rigid kind of approach that's more punitive. Several years ago, I did have a student that I said, why didn't you turn something in? And she said, on your syllabus, you said you don't take late work. And, my dad died. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's just so horrible. So I've been working on that. And Lisa, who's not here, has given me the OOPS policy, and my students really love that. One of the major assignments, you can turn in 24 hours late. And all you have to do is send me an email saying I'm using the OOPS policy. So there's another term later on that I can't remember off the top of my head that helps with, so they don't have to explain anything. So, but this has really made me rethink some how I'm going to do some things. So the context that we're in now, I think a lot has changed since COVID. I think there's been a big change in our students for a variety of reasons. But one of the some of the research did said that only 86% of first-time students come back for semester two. And I guess I could have done the other math, but because we are concerned about retention and policies, I think that in order to help our students along, that being flexible, and hopefully after we look at this presentation, being flexible does not mean that we're being easy or doing them any damage down the line. So I think those flexible policies are going to be helpful. They've been helpful to me. My students really, you demonstrate to them that you care about what's going on. And I tell them, with the OOPS policy, everybody has a bad day in a semester at least once. So that's why I do that. So one of the interesting bit of research I did was that procrastination. Wang's data proves that procrastinators are just as smart and capable as non-procrastinators. I'm thankful for that, and I know that Elliot is as well. Uh, we're not, and it's just that they suffer more under rigid deadlines. And so, if you're flexible, then I think you can help those students out. Students are not going to be procrastinate more because you have flexible times. That's in Wang's research as well. So flexibility benefits all students, and whether or not you're a procrastinator or not, it does help all students. Next, there are some barriers that our students are facing. The internal barriers. They're trying to prioritize tasks connected with their career goals. And so because I teach theology and I don't have a lot of theology majors, I realize that I do have students who are managing and using that strategic neglect where they are saying, you know what, if I get a 90 in theology, that's all I need, but I really want to get a 98 in biology. So there are external stressors, caregiving, trauma-related stress, mental health issues, which is very important with our students. And so students need to, having had three kids go to college, I realized that, prioritizing assignments is actually a good strategy. It's not being lazy, it's being smart. If you're spending way too much time on a course that's not part of your major, I don't know that that's a good strategy anyway. So the takeaways are, you know, there is students are making calculated decisions, and sometimes I think we need to be aware of that, and not real and realize our course is not the most important course. Of course, because I teach theology, I know that for me. But I mean, uh, a lot of times students will say that with how much reading we have, it seems like you think this is the only class we have. So there are three ways to do flexibility. There's the inflexible, uh, where you say these are the deadlines. No, no, I don't take late work. And this that is associated with a high cognitive load. So they're stressed. It stresses them even if they're doing well. It's still a stressor. What happens if I do get sick or can't perform? And then there's the self-imposed deadlines. There is research saying that that is not very effective, that the most effective is a flexible, so that you can give them uh, I think a 72-hour grace period is a bit long, but it's, that was the suggestion, 48 to 72 hours. So research seems to show that this is the best approach, is a flexible instructor set time, as opposed to saying, hey, you can turn it in anytime you want. Because we all know that we've seen students in the last week of class wanting to do the whole everything that was due until then. This is something that really struck me, and I feel really bad about it. I've always, and the reason I set the 11:59 is because I can never remember which is noon and which is midnight. So I always do 11:59. But I started doing this because I would have like a noon deadline, and they were finishing up at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, well, I might need to be more accommodating. But the University of Alaska Fairbanks did a survey, and almost 80% of their assignments were due at midnight. And their research said that it makes students miss the next day, or be sleepy the next day. And so I'm consciously changing that to a 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock, so that my students aren't forced to be awake. If they want to stay up the night before and turn it in at 2, that's fine, but I don't want to contribute to their stress. And so that's another issue that I think that kind of struck me as I looked through this research. Um, Tokens is another approach that I don't use, but I use the approach that Lisa had with the OOPS policy. But I'm thinking that a token system might be good. The research on it is fairly strong, and so it helps them to negotiate when they're doing their work, and it teaches them to help prioritize all of their assignments, and it doesn't really prioritize laziness. There are different ways to do this. I think I might start giving at least 2 or 3 tokens on day one, and then that this is a little bit later in the presentation, but that's going to stop all of those panicked emails from your students. All they'll have to do is say, here's my token, and they don't have to stress or make up a lie about, maybe my uncle died or whatever, or the stress of having to tell you what's going on in their lives, and it's very personal for them. So I like the approach of just, if you're going to turn it in late, just tell me and don't give me a reason. The term that one of the authors I read called it trauma dumping, so they have to tell one professor this was going on, then they have to tell another and another and another, and students are really not comfortable with that. I've had students tell me later that they wanted to tell me, but they were just kind of embarrassed. And this way, you just don't have that issue at all. Scaffolding, this is similar to the last time I did a presentation. The tilt framework about giving students the why they need to do this, be specific about what the end product is going to look at. Again, all of this has to do with lowering their stress. So give them the why. And this is kind of a good way to, it was developed by Melissa Bartlett, and give them the why so that they understand this is not busy work. Tell them the explicit end goal and provide some models if you have that ability. And this last semester, I was talking to Ray about a particular assignment I have, and the problem was they were starting, they had to determine what was a external social or political factor outside the church. And Ray said, why don't you just ask them, get them to do that up front so that they won't do a whole paper. And then one of the 4 points in their paper is wrong, and they've lost 15, 20 points. And so this is a form of scaffolding. Tell them what you want and then go through the specific steps and resources, and then divide it into concrete tasks. And so that's what Ray said. Why don't you have them, first of all, write something down and tell you these are their 4 examples, and then you can work with them if they're wrong. And so I think that's a good way to relieve stress as well. This is interesting. I didn't know what an analytical rubric versus rater. I'm sorry, analytical versus the holistic type of rubric. I tend in my rubrics to be very explicit in all of the components of the paper. And that way students will know, okay, well, I've covered this, or I've covered this, or I've covered this. And another term I learned was the halo effect of one aspect of when you're grading papers, just read through it quickly and then start grading it rather than putting all your red ink all over the paper, because sometimes you'll have a paper with great content but poor grammar, and that's going to bias your, and also the halo effect too is, I used to tell students when I taught the freshman seminar that do really, really well on your first papers, and then your professor will know that you're a good student. And I know that's a terrible thing to tell them, but that's what I did my whole career, and I told my students this last week that if the professor asked for um, 4 external components, I always gave them 5, because if one of mine was wrong, I said that's just kind of the anal, how I was. But um, it does. I do try to. I tell my students not to put their names on their papers in Brightspace, and so I'll just download it and then grade it, downloaded, so I don't know who it is, and that's also helpful for not being biased. This is kind of an interesting. I read about, my first inclination in this is, hey, we're babying the students. We're not preparing them for the real world, but we know, working at Xavier, that the real world does have flexible deadlines, and so flexible deadlines are out. It's out there, and when you are in your professional world, you do have to balance different deadlines, and sometimes there is a strict deadline, but there's no reason for every deadline to be strict. And so this allows your students to make that choice and determine which one is the most important at the time. So also, if I have a grace period, everybody will just wait to the last minute. Research says this is not the case. If you have those students who always turn their stuff in on time, but you have a grace period, chances are they're not going to use that grace period because that's the kind of students they are. And the ones that don't manage their time well are the ones who this helps. And we want to help them because of, again, because of retention and just being a caring, loving professor. Lowering the bar, you're not lowering the bar. You're requiring the same thing from everybody. You're not lower, it's the due date, not the complexity of the assignment. And so that was one of the arguments that if you had somebody pushing back on this is another answer. Flexible policies will create a grading nightmare for me. Well, I don't have to, yeah, I know, right? Uh, However, when I quit requiring my students, when I did the OOPS policy and quit requiring my students to tell me what was going on, it relieved a lot of stress because you could say, well, this isn't really a legitimate excuse, or this is and so what it does is I don't get 50 emails the day before something's due anymore because I've made this I've extended it with a an OOPS policy. So it does slow down those emails, but I think it also allows us, our students, to realize that, you know, um, we're extending grace. So if it takes me a couple of days extra to get your paper in, then extend me the grace. And I've found that to be the case as well. Yeah, 11:59 is the standard. Not for me anymore. I just think I feel guilty that it's been my policy for so long. So here's the references. I've given you those. What we usually do is we will um, uh, put the resources on our wiki, and we will also the recording to our wiki. So if you have any questions now, let me know.